what is nihilism? It's the conclusion you arrive at that there is nothing to be believed in. It's a critique of belief that concludes not just with the rejection of one belief or any particular set of beliefs, but of all beliefs. It's a critique even of, you can say, the psychology of believing in general. Very typically, someone might be raised in the Catholic Church. They're taught believe, believe, believe. They're taught that faith and believing are, really important, virtuous things. And then as they get older, they maybe engage in a critique of what it is they believe, right? Now, one conclusion you could come to would be to reject Catholicism and embrace Protestantism. I've actually met people who did that, where they lose their faith in this particular church, this particular doctrine or creed, but they adopt another church, another doctrine, another creed. However, even if you're talking about someone who rejects the belief in Jesus, the belief in God, or particular principles, there's quite a separate question of having a critique of belief as such, where you come to the conclusion it's not just having faith in these particular things that was erroneous or wrong. I have now come to appreciate that faith itself is bad. Faith itself is a problem. Faith itself is to be rejected. What I used to think of as a virtue in believing, I now see as a vice, as an encumbrance. So, in proposing the definition of historical nihilism, this is really forms a perfect symmetry with Chinese communism. What the Chinese Communist Party teaches today as its creed is that you must believe in history, that you must believe in historical inevitability, that you must believe that the mistakes that were made in the past were all for the best, because they're part of this logical, necessary, inevitable progress of history that they're teaching people to memorize, of passing through stages of development, something like evolution. So the fact that tens of millions of people starved to death because of an error, that's somehow too terrible for us to accept emotionally. So then instead we construe this new religion where we want to believe that wasn't just an error, that wasn't just a mistake, it was for the greater good. And that the good things we have now are somehow a product of that mistake. So something white people might be able to relate to more easily. What if you had one group of people in your society who said, look, the whole experience of slavery, of specifically enslaving black Africans and bringing them to the New World, this is just an error. This is just a mistake. This is just terrible. And everyone would be better off today if we hadn't done it. People in Africa would be better as well as people in the United States and Europe and so on. This was just wrong. And then you have another group of people who are saying, no, you can't believe that. You can't accept that. You must believe that this was for the greater good, that this was the right thing to do at the time because it made sense. So this type of rationalization, it's not just Chinese communists who do it, although Chinese communism is an extreme example. Well, the series of negations that I'm interested in, that have mattered to me personally and that I basically preach to others, they have to do with, in this sense, rejecting what people think is meaningful in history, what people believe in history. And I'm saying, no, it's precisely not believing in those things that matters. It's precisely having detachment about those things. And, this is the simplest way to describe it is say, look, atheism is just taking one step. Atheism is just rejecting a belief in God, right? What nihilism is interested in is taking a much greater second step. It's not just God, it's belief itself that we're rejecting.
I have a bunch of this is interesting. I have a bunch of follow-up questions. Is this just kind of an awareness that things like history are unreliable? Like, is that part of it? That if we just, go with what's accepted as some piece of history, you're kind of, deluding yourself potentially knowing how unreliable history is. Is that connected to what you're talking about?
I think reliability is kind of irrelevant because we're not talking about the ability to know what happened, but we're talking about the way in which people believe in things and then assign meanings to them in their life on the basis of that belief, right? Trisha Paytas, has recently had a scandal on YouTube because she admitted she had never heard of the Holocaust. She didn't even know that she knew nothing about this. I think you might have heard this part of the H3H3 descent into madness. So, okay, this is just something you don't know. Now, that's one kind of problem, which is just ignorance, right? Now, there are other people who fasten onto and believe in the events of the Holocaust to justify one ideology or another. Now, the ugliest and most extreme, of course, would be people like neo-Nazis who take it in one direction. I've had Muslim friends. I have one ex-Muslim friend now, a guy who was raised Muslim. There are certainly a lot of people who are part of the mainstream religion of Islam for whom that history and anti-Semitism has a whole other bunch of meanings. But like on a really simple level, if you know someone who believes, and this is quite common, oh, the Germans did this terrible thing to us, therefore it's okay for us to commit these atrocities against Palestinians now. If you were actually justifying doing terrible things to Germans, there's already a problem here, right? But, these people in Palestine had nothing to do with the Nazis. They didn't, they weren't working for Adolf Hitler or something. In this way, people really do assign meanings to history, and they believe in them, and they find justifications for the lives they're living now. They find justifications for committing atrocities and doing terrible things now. They also find justifications for just leading, frankly, mediocre lives. Now, for whatever it is they're doing with their life in general. People become beholden to fixed ideas in history. And some of these ideas, we learn them in early childhood. And they may be very difficult for us to wiggle our way out of. Certainly, nationalism gives us a great many examples in this same way. But the problem there, but just to answer your question again directly, the problem there isn't that the actual facts are unknowable, right? It's not the uncertainty of knowing what happened in history. It's what you're doing with that knowledge afterward. It's believing in it. That's the problem.
So what is your, because you clearly read a lot of history and stuff, how do you get around that exactly? Or what's your solution to this issue with history?
Wow.
Because it's an issue with history and how it's interpreted, it sounds like.
Yeah, and it's an issue with history and what it what it means in your life. Okay, so I spent about 10 years studying Buddhism. I'm just trying to give you an example it's easy to understand. All right. Why was I the only scholar working on Buddhism willing to talk about slavery? Okay, Buddhism also, as an historical tradition, as a culture, and as a religion, it was involved with slave trading. All right. In the area I was in northern Thailand and Laos, they bought and sold slaves at the Buddhist temple. It's not remote. The Buddhist temples owned slaves. Okay, there were slaves who were the property of the Buddhist temple, all right? And even the language of ancient Buddhist scripture, it's full of the word slave again and again and again. The word slave's in there all the time, okay? I think I had a kind of flexibility of mind, a kind of openness to responding to the facts and asking questions about them that true believers didn't have, right? Now, I knew other scholars of Buddhism. I knew religious Buddhists. And, they'd say things very similar to what Muslims will say in making excuses for slavery in their religion. Like, oh, no, but you have to understand, that's justified for this reason. Like, that was good and necessary and inevitable. You can't let yourself think that was bad. You can't let yourself question that, No. I let myself think the unthinkable. I let myself question the unquestionable all the time. So in tearing apart history, I'm finding new meanings that other people won't find, precisely because I depart from this position of radical skepticism of regarding everyone else's beliefs and assumptions as meaningless. French people don't want to ask the question of what Napoleon really did in relation to slavery, especially in the island of Haiti. Oh, no, Napoleon was a great hero. He saved the revolution. He stood up for the principles of the equality of man. Did he? Did Napoleon stand up for the principles of the equality of man, of black men? Did he? And people will live their whole lives. They may even read huge books like this about Napoleon, and they can never question it, and they can never think it through. Sorry, a really, really short example, but this one, stays with me emotionally. There's a major monument in Bangkok, Thailand, that they just call the Victory Monument. And I asked many learned people. All these people were university graduates. They all spoke English. At that time, I couldn't speak Thai. I could ask where the bathroom was in Thai. I spoke very little language. And I asked them, and you see this monument almost every day. It's right in the middle. It's at a major intersection in Bangkok. But anyway, you at least see it every week living in Bangkok. And it's this big monument. It's shown on the news. It's a big iconic monument. I asked them, what was the victory that monument was made to commemorate? And of course, the first thing that's interesting is none of them knew. And many of them had literally worshipped this monument. It's not worth describing, but they do these different things of bowing and placing flowers and stuff. And I'm not trying to insult them for that. But you're worshiping a monument and you don't even know what the historical event was. And I think 2 or 3 of the people that kind of scratched their heads and thought about it, they're like, I guess it must be World War II. And then I asked, did Thailand win in World War II? They didn't. They lost. They lost twice. I'm not going to do it. No, I actually do know what that monument is a monument to. People live with legends about national greatness, personal greatness, ethnic identity, the meaning of life. They're not quite as powerful as religious delusions. I wouldn't say they shape people's lives to the same extent that belief in Islam or Christianity or Mormonism does. But, in this way, your life becomes infested with and delimited by your beliefs. To a remarkable extent, it limits the questions you can ask. It limits what you can learn, what you're capable of accomplishing creatively, in my opinion.
So going back to the nihilism definition, it's something to the effect of avoiding beliefs so that your thinking isn't rigid. You're not stuck to things that are not necessarily reliable. It's just kind of you still have, like, let's say, soft beliefs, things that you are pretty sure of, but you still leave room for. But how far do you take that? Like, do you believe in like an objective reality? Is it a lack of trust in information, or is it a lack of trust? Where do you think this, like? I want to hear more about this nihilism.
Right.
We
Good.
Kind of straight off I went into history a bit, but tell me more about like this.
Totally. So you're thinking more of skepticism or cynicism, because that's about knowledge and what can be known, right? And what I'm talking about is a critique of belief, not of knowledge. So I'm not interested at all in the question of does 2 + 2 = 4. So if you ask the question, is objective reality real and knowable? Because that's always the tough part. It's not whether or not things are objectively real, but can you know that they're real? Do you really know what color this shirt is? As if you have experience with YouTube and live streaming, very often you put on a shirt that's red and it looks pink. They just say, this is maybe a shallow example, but still, this question of are things knowable? This is, from my perspective, quite separate from belief. To what extent is objective reality real and knowable? When people play baseball, right, you have to draw lines on the field. And the lines in the field have to be visible to all parties. So you know when you hit the ball if it is fair or foul. So you know where first base is and you know where second base is. Can you imagine playing baseball without drawing any lines on the field? Like where every player just has to use their imagination for where first base is. Oh, did you make it to first base or not? Some other sports you go say is about football or something. Oh, was that a touchdown or not? I don't know. He says it in his subjective opinion. It was. This isn't the reality we live in. We live in a reality where most of the distinctions we rely on are self-evident to everyone. What's disputed is what they mean, in what sense they matter now. So with history, it's not so much what we take from the past, it's the use we make of it in the present. The facts of the Holocaust can be established quite simply. Do they justify the current existence of the state of Israel as a theocracy, by the way, not as a democracy? What does that really have to do with the relationship between Islam and Jews in the Middle East, which has another history going back, more than 1,000 years and so on? Okay, but to them, because they believe in these things, that's as self-evident as third base. They see that those lines that they've drawn, they live within those lines, they dream in them, they think in them. And so beliefs come to form their expectations of the reality, the way they perceive reality, the way they live their lives. Yeah, so that's, I just say, it's a critique of the steps we take after merely knowing simple facts. And look, so we're both Canadian, to my knowledge. It's one thing to be aware that Canada is a country built on genocide, and it's another thing to manufacture a nationalist myth or a British Empire myth that justifies that as something necessary and good and meaningful and positive, to believe that it was for the greater good, that the native languages should go extinct, the native people should be driven off their land, and so on. Right? There's a step there which doesn't directly rely on the mere knowledge of facts. For me, nihilism is a tremendously liberating, creative, positive philosophy to live with, but it also puts all the responsibility on you, because I don't care that your grandparents were Catholic, or your grandparents were Jewish, or your grandparents were Mohawk First Nations people, right? It's all on you. It's your blank canvas. It's your life, and then it's your responsibility. And you can squander it. You can just play video games. You can do nothing, right? Or you can just try to mindlessly imitate what your grandparents did before, believe the same things they believe, walk in their footsteps. You can, right? But then there's this radically different possibility of something better, of something worse, of something new, of something unknown, but something that's yours, right? Your painting, your sculpture, your knowledge, your wisdom, your ignorance, your life. And that's the sense in which nihilism is going to beat every other philosophy, every other religion, every time, because no other philosophy is really yours.